Hey everyone, welcome back to LogTech Live. My name is Eric Johnson. I am your host each and every episode, and I am, as always, delighted to be with you here on a fairly sunny Friday morning in Alexandria, Virginia. For some reason, it's been like a second winter here, the last couple weeks. So glad to see some sunshine and that it's getting a little bit warmer. Happy St. Patrick's Day to those who celebrate it. This is sort of a green shirt. This is kind of the greenest shirt I had that didn't make me look like a leprechaun. So, really glad to be here. We have a fantastic show for you today with a somewhat unique guest for this show. It's someone who's not technically in tech, but who wrote a really, really interesting essay about technology in the world of shipping. So I can't wait to bring her on in about 10 minutes. But before I do, first of all, thank you to everyone who supports this show each and every episode. Love your support and glad you can join us each episode. If this is your first time, you picked a good one. We have a really cool show today. So delighted to have you with us. Just a few things. Travel schedule is picking up again. I got like 2-3 weeks after TPM to recover. Next week, I will be in Houston for S&P Global's World Petrochemical Conference. I'll be part of the Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics Summit. I'm doing a couple sessions around some research that one of my colleagues at S&P did around logistics technology investment. This is, for those of you who are at TPM Tech, this is something we discussed there. We're going to be talking about it as it relates specifically to the chemical industry. I'll also be doing a really cool session with 3 vendors that are all targeting technology for chemical shippers and the chemical logistics industry in general. So can't wait to get to that event next week. And if you're in town and if you're going to the event, please connect with me. Would be great to see you on site. One other event that I just wanted to highlight in the near future, next month, about 5 weeks out, from JOC's Break Bulk and Project Cargo Conference. Again, I'm doing a couple sessions around technology in that space. That'll be in New Orleans. No one needs a good excuse to go to New Orleans. A better excuse than going to New Orleans. But if you need one, you should go to this event. It's a fantastic event for this industry. Highly recommend it. You can use the code EricJ25 for 25% off a registration to that event. So hope to see you in New Orleans next month. Some other news. Since our last episode, my weekly newsletter, the LogTech letter, is finally back after about a 7-week hiatus, which was by far the longest time I'd ever taken from writing that. It got a little too comfortable to not write, so I had to get back in the groove. Had a great guest post last week. Did my first post that I actually wrote in literally like 2 months today, that just was out about an hour ago. So make sure you check that out. It was great to, as I was telling someone else, it was great to exercise that part of my brain again after a pretty nutty couple months leading up to TPM. So definitely check out my newsletter. One other thing I'm going to highlight before I get to news of the week: blended pledge. If you're tired of hearing me talking about this each episode, then do something about it and give to this initiative. Or better yet, like I say, why is there not some company that is just owning this and saying, this is our thing? We are going to be the company that is behind the blended pledge, that is making sure that diverse voices who get invited to speak at logistics industry events, supply chain industry events, are actually able to travel and get there and have the budget to do it. A lot of times this happens where I invite someone and they can't get buy-in from their company, and the company either tries to send someone else or says no. And it's like, wait a second, we are trying to make this, the people on stage and at events, more representative of the actual industry and not just a bunch of dudes who look like me. So let's make this happen. Okay. There's the details about the blended pledge are in the comments. So please click on the link, donate, or get your company to own this issue and be the one who makes a difference. All right. Off my soapbox now and on to news of the week. So that research that I highlighted, that we're going to present a little bit more around at the WPC event in Houston next week. I actually wrote about this last week. There's a report. It's on joc.com. You can find this. If you can't find it, let me know. I will, or we'll have Nicole share the link on this episode or next episode. The report is free to download. You just need to register for it. But I wrote about it last week on joc.com. Some of the interesting aspects of this. I think we were both Mark Fontecchio, the author of the report, and I were a bit surprised to see so many companies saying they were sort of on the path to digitizing or digitalizing their, those are different things, their supply chains, especially around logistics. I think it's more a measure. I think we both kind of agree. It's more a measure of kind of an aspirational state than a actual physical state right now. But it's good to know that this is top of mind and front and center. And also, hopefully, companies are getting the attention off of the craziness that occurred during the pandemic. They're sort of leveraging that attention into actual budget to do something about things that they've been wanting to do a long time. I think one of the things we talked about at TPM Tech as it relates to this study is defining digitization. Is it taking a process you have and getting an electronic version of it? Is it taking a process? Is it kind of getting yourself a process off of email into sort of a cloud-based platform? That's like the basic stuff, right? I think what we're sort of wanting to see or hoping to see as an industry is a lot more, change beyond just kind of migrating existing processes incrementally toward slightly better versions of those processes. So definitely read the story. Definitely download the report. Lots of good data and info in there to incorporate into your decision making. Next story I wanted to highlight was actually one I did earlier this week. I was a day late on this, admittedly, as a reporter. I was off Monday. These came out Monday, but I felt like I needed to report on them the following day because Freightos, as we've talked about before, went public in January. The reason I think it's important to follow what they're doing is not necessarily that I think they are doing some interesting things, but there's lots of companies doing interesting things. But they are the first one to sort of take the plunge in public markets out of the cohort of technology providers that emerged in the logistics industry over the last decade or so. So how they do is important to watch, and obviously having some insight into their financials is also interesting because we don't often get a lot of insight into private companies that are especially venture backed unless the CEO comes out and puts out numbers. But again, we have no way of vetting those numbers. When they're actual financials, it's a lot more interesting. So one thing with Freightos, right? Like a lot of discussion in other media outlets that covered this, a lot of discussion from the analysts that talked on the earnings call about, does the current market, which is low freight demand, low freight rates, impact Freightos' model? I think we're sort of putting the cart before the horse here. Like, we don't know yet, right? I mean, we can speculate about whether the model is durable, their sort of marketplace platform model is durable or not, but we don't know yet. So it's not my job to say whether it is or isn't. It's my job to report on the interesting aspects of their financials and what some of the analysts are saying. So we'll be watching that closely. Last story I wanted to highlight was one that posted earlier this week on joc.com as well. Shipwell, which has been an interesting company to cover simply because I haven't always known how to characterize them. Are they a broker? Are they a marketplace? Are they a TMS? So I addressed some of that in this story, which was them releasing an RFP or a procurement tool for SME shippers specifically to sort of tack on to their TMS that's aimed at small to medium sized shippers. So lots of interesting details here. I think their model of going after a market that they feel, and I would mostly agree, is underserved from the TMS market, which generally wants enterprise shippers, big volume shippers, big complexity shippers. is interesting, and I'm not surprised to see them getting some traction around that and adding this procurement aspect of it. So definitely encourage you to read that story as well for more details. With no further ado, though, it's time to bring my guest on. I am super excited to have today Miriam Posner, who is an assistant professor at UCLA. Go Bruins! My dad went to UCLA in the dark ages, so even though I didn't go there, I always have a soft spot in my heart for Bruins. Miriam, so glad you could join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I told this already to Eric, but I just want to apologize for my weird surroundings. It turns out my office doesn't open this early in the morning, so I'm kind of hiding in a corner of the student union.
Well, this is our first guest who's done it remote from a student union. We've had lots of remote guests before, but this is a new one. So, yeah, thanks so much for joining us fairly early in the morning on the West Coast too. So,
Sure.
Miriam, I guess my first question is: I usually have people who are, CEOs, CTOs, VC investors. Why am I having an assistant professor at UCLA on about logistics technology?
Oh, well, why wouldn't you? I mean, no, let's see, back in December, I think it was, I published an article in a magazine called Logic, detailing the current sort of ecosystem of data in the shipping industry, and trying to talk about, like, why does so much shipping run on paper when there are all these entrants to the industry who are so high tech. And we got to talking about it, and thought we might have some stuff to say.
For sure. So that and I cannot wait to talk to you more about that essay. But let's backtrack a little bit. What's your background, and sort of what first got you interested in this topic specifically?
Yeah, good question. Well, I teach in an information studies department, which is a real thing. I didn't make it up. I know it sounds like it could
What
be
is information?
anything, just information in general. But information studies, you look at the way like systems of information work and the effects of those systems on the rest of the world. And it's pretty broad. Like, it could be anything from, like, how does a database work, or could we build a better database for information retrieval, to, like, what are the political and social effects of, like, the way that data is organized or the way that we share information. And so I'm kind of on that, like, what are the political and social effects end of the spectrum? So I'm always interested in, like, the way that information moves. But I'm also really interested in labor. I think because I grew up in Silicon Valley, but sort of on the wrong side of the tracks. If you know San Jose, I grew up on the east side, and this was, in the 80s and 90s. So I got to see the growth and explosion of the tech industry, but I was always aware that those benefits weren't extending to where I grew up, to my high school and my friends. And so I think as a result, I grew up with a really strong interest in technology, but also, some innate skepticism when people talk about how it's going to bring benefits to everyone. So I yeah. So I was teaching a class on digital labor a few years ago, and I thought, well, one thing we should probably talk about is, like, supply chains. Like, that seems like something you should talk about. And I had this idea where I would get my students to track the supply chain of, like, this sounds very naive now, of, like, some kind of electronic product. But thankfully, like, I had the sense to try to do it before I assigned it, and I realized, like, oh, you can't do that, and it really surprised me. And it took me a long time to realize that companies weren't, like, keeping the information secret. It was just that, like, they didn't have it. And so I couldn't understand, like, how is it that you know exactly, like, when your phone is going to show up at your door, but they don't know who makes it. And that just really preoccupied me. And so the rest is kind of history. I've been looking at this situation, as best I can for a few years now.
That is super interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people have sort of made that connection over the last couple of years about the importance of supply chain, and also how kind of mysterious it actually is, even for those whose jobs it is, right? Like one way that manifests itself with me is I sometimes have people who are in the industry asking me questions that I would have presumed that I would have been asking them, or I would just
Right.
assume that they know the answer to. But there's a lot of people who operate in little kind of cells,
Yep.
where they're doing a specific process, and they don't really have a view to what's going on in the next process, or three processes down. So
Totally.
yeah,
Yes.
very interesting, very interesting. Well, so I'm curious, how is like, can you take us through kind of what you are doing day to day, uh, like as an academic,
Oh, yeah.
and how that might overlap or translate into what's going on in the actual commercial world?
Yeah. So I've been writing a book actually about supply chain technology very slowly, unfortunately. And so when I'm researching, I'm spending a lot of time just reading industry news and a lot of time just trying to untangle all the different strands that make up the logistics industry.
Yep.
Um, so on a day-to-day basis, I spend a lot of my time teaching and emailing. I think probably most of us spend most of our time sending emails. But then when I have time, I read a lot of industry literature, and then I read a lot of like historical work on the emergence of markets in the first place, or like where did data come from in the first place, because I find that really helps me to you know to know what to look for when I'm reading all of this very confusing, like overlapping literature.
It's always felt to me like, especially when I come across a new kind of wrinkle, like a technology company will approach me and they'll say, "Hey, we're trying to fix this thing that happens,"
Yeah.
and I have a very superficial understanding of that thing that the problem that they're trying to fix. And so I talk to some people, or I read some about it, and I have this sort of feeling that I'm like mentally trying to constantly untangle Christmas lights.
Yes.
It's like you pull something, I go, I understand that. Oh, but then it actually just made the whole knot tighter, and I understand it less. And then it loosens up, and I feel like I'm making progress. And then again, I'm like, oh wait, I didn't understand actually any of this like I thought I did. So
So
that's a
true.
big, big, big problem. So I think people,
Yes.
tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think people totally underestimate how actually complicated logistics is. I think there's a sense that all the tech was supposed to simplify it, but there's some things that are innately complicated that tech just can't simplify, right? I mean,
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think you put it really well in one of your newsletters that like there's data flowing from 100 different faucets, but like it's not being channeled into one big stream. It's just like coming from everywhere, and it's not being combined and sort of made use of as one thing.
so as I was thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking academia can be kind of like that too, right? Like you can
Yeah.
you can pull from a million different sources throughout the history of mankind writing about uh, this or that, right? How do you
Hmm.
know what the right source
Yeah.
is? How do you combine those things to help kind of solve the puzzle you're trying to solve?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's every day. You're just trying to figure it out. Um, but I was thinking about that like in preparation for today, and I thought, well, a PhD in the humanities does not prepare you to do like a lot of things like pay your rent or, take care of your family. But, one thing I had to do in preparation was take these comprehensive exams where the expectation was I would read, one academic book a day, and then 9 months later be prepared to like answer any question anyone could think of.
Yep.
And it was kind of a trial by fire, where you end up like curled up in the fetal position. Like I can't absorb any more information. But you do learn to like absorb a lot of information and then sort of put it in buckets as you go, and come up with ways of sort of framing it that are helpful, and not overwhelmingly complicated. So I think that I found that really helpful.
So that's what my humanities degree did for me.
Well,
I think along the same way. It's like I can't just take the fire hose of information and compute it like I imagine a mathematics person or an engineer can.
Yeah.
You need to be like, okay, this goes on top of this pile.
Exactly.
This goes on top of this pile, and then I have like 8 piles that I'm constantly like referring back to. But
yeah, it's all about sorting it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just like this, this is about this. Yeah.
Interesting. Who are your students? What are they? What are they trying to like get out of what you're teaching them? What are you hoping that they are taking away from like a long-term basis?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that information studies departments do is train librarians and archivists. So if you've heard of the MLS degree, that's where they get it. So I spent a lot of time just imparting like technical skills for them, like, how does the database work? How do you kind of navigate the file system? Things like that, which isn't super related, but in a way it is. But then in classes that are closer to my own research interests, one of the things that I hope they'll get is that there's all these hidden worlds of infrastructure that don't become apparent until they break or until we deliberately look at them.
Yeah.
And even though they may not seem glamorous or exciting to the outsider, they're a really important mechanism for distributing power. It's a really important way that that people either receive resources or are denied resources. There's a scholar of infrastructure who calls it like the society for people interested in the study of boring things. And so I always think, yeah, that's kind of what I'm into, the boring things.
When my wife's eyes glaze over every time I mention logistics, she would agree that I'm in that society. So
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the boring stuff that matters.
That's very interesting. So I have a colleague, Kathy Morrow Roberson, who might be known to people here, who is in her past life before getting into logistics. She used to work at a forwarder, UPS. But before that, she was a librarian. So she has that mentality, and I'm sure she would appreciate auditing your class. She'd be like, oh, this is like my world. So very interesting. Very, very interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. Okay. So much ground to cover. So I want to keep things moving. We could talk about any of these subjects for 30 minutes. So let's get into the essay that you referred to. And we have a link to the essay in the comments. So please download it or open it up and read it. Not right now, but after the conversation. Totally worth your time. Tell me about what was the impetus for writing this? How long did it take? What were your goals in terms of like what did you hope would come out of it?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that I'd been working on like a book about supply chain technology for a while. And I spent a long time looking at like SAP and like how does their supply chain management software work. and I spent a lot of time just trying to understand like the history of the profession. But I felt like there was something I just didn't get. Like there was something really fundamental that I wasn't understanding, and I realized like I think it's the way that things actually move on the ocean. Like how and why do things move from one direction to another, and how do people like transmit information about where they go? And so that was something that really interested me. Um, and as I researched a little more, I realized that there's to a surprising extent, shipping depends on paper. Um, very few bills of lading are electronic at this point. A lot of um, a lot of documents just have to change hands physically. And yet, at the same time, there are all these people talking about these incredibly sophisticated technological solutions. And so I was like, how does that compute? Like, why is it that we can't exchange all this information digitally if there are so many high-tech people in the industry? And I just found that like a really fascinating tension. And I have to say, I don't want to embarrass you, Eric, but when I found your work, I was like, oh, this guy, like he's the one who gets it. This is
I knew there was someone who actually was like cared about this stuff too.
no, I was like, I found the key. And as I was writing, this is actually true. I thought, what would Eric Johnson say about this? Would he say this is inaccurate? So when you reached out, I was like, yes, I accomplished my goal.
So funny story I was just sharing with Miriam before we went live is you actually reached out to me by email as you were putting this together to talk. I totally missed the email, never responded back to it. And then I read this completely without knowing Miriam. I read the essay and then reached out to her afterwards to compliment her on it. And then as I was researching for this episode today, I went back in my inbox and I was like, oh my God, I missed the reach out from you about this.
We all
So
get too many emails.
I know,
Trust me,
I know,
get it.
but the thing, it's like, I think you did a really good job
Thank you.
of addressing. Well, so let me get. I don't want to spoil. I want people to go and read the essay. But what was sort of your like aha moment in terms of that disconnect between all the solutions that are on offer and yet the resistance to use or reluctance maybe to use them?
Yeah. I think it was probably like the lack of standards for the entire industry that everyone is committed to.
Yeah.
In most cases, when people are exchanging data, there's some set of standards for exchanging that information that everyone feels okay about. But for some reason, that's not the case in the shipping industry. There are like lots of competing standards. There are efforts to like impose standards, but it seems as though no one really has the institutional heft or the weight to ensure that everyone adheres to them. And then there are also like some business reasons that various components of the industry are not super excited about making their data available in one stream. For a freight forwarder who holds a whole bunch of data about where stuff goes, that data represents a competitive advantage. And so it's not clear how it would benefit them necessarily to make that information available. But at the same time, there are tons and tons of people who would love to have access to that global map of where stuff is moving. Because if you know that, then you can make bets on the stock market. You have insight into like future shortages or future oversupplies. One one person I quoted called it like the no bullshit truth of like what the economy is doing. So there's a little bit of an arms race, like who's going to get the data?
Sorry, my dog has some very strong thoughts about what you just said. So
I don't blame them.
yeah,
That's very urgent.
Now she's piped down. I think what you touched on is something. Standardization is this sort of it's this sort of like giant elephant in the room that everyone tries to ignore, and some people try to address largely unsuccessfully. Data standardization. It's actually something that we tried to get a start on in terms of corralling all the different approaches to standardization. At TPM Tech this year, we had a DevCon where we had a group of 5 to 10 people really trying to figure out how to attack the data standardization problem, and hopefully we will be a lot further along in a year's time on that. But you're right, there's no sort of like Jedi Council that decides this is how everyone is going to present this data point or this particular document, right? And so, I mean, at TPM, we had a session on a commitment that the ocean carriers have made by 2030 to essentially digitize bills of lading. That's, I would say, progress, but there's so much more, and so I that's very interesting that was your sort of takeaway from this exercise, because I think that is sort of a root cause, or a primary root cause of a lot of the sort of adoption challenges. There's also the reality that this is just a very fragmented industry, and without that Jedi Council, in a hugely fragmented industry, you're just going to have a lot of people doing their own thing. Sometimes they're doing their own thing for their own benefit. Sometimes they're trying to do something that benefits the whole industry, but it's like just this little pocket in this one region, and it just doesn't spread because they don't have the hammer to like make everyone do it. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One thing I realized, it sounds obvious when you say it, but one of the fascinating things about global markets is, like, we talk about the market, but really it's not a market. It's a ton, like millions of tiny little transactions and different patchworks all around the country. So there's, the market is an abstraction. The reality is like two people exchanging documents millions and millions of times. And so making that all cohere is a huge, huge challenge.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this was like during the like mainstream world's fascination with like logistics and supply chain. My number one pet peeve was everyone calling it the supply chain is broken.
Right.
And I was like, this was my fewer or less than like the world. I was like, this is not like the 405, right? This is not a highway that everyone uses the same highway. Everyone has their own. In fact, some companies have multiple supply chains within their own company. Like, stop calling it the supply chain, because some people's supply chain is broken, some people's are not, right? So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I think you summarized that really well in terms of this is like millions and millions of discrete transactions that are somehow being like abstracted into this bigger picture. So okay, we talked a bit about sort of the fire hose of data that is out there. What do you think is behind sort of, from your research, what do you think is behind the industry's like current fascination with data, right? Accumulating data and without really having an idea about what to do with it.
Yeah, well, I think there are multiple incentives at work. One is just, the ability to track and trace shipments. Like, why would you not want to do that? It seems like a very reasonable thing to want to do. But there are also some changes taking place in financial markets that are a little less visible until you go to look for them, but that may be working toward the aggregation of this data. In particular, there's this area of trading called trade finance. I don't know how well most people
I
know
think
about this.
most people understand it at least
Okay.
on a basic level, if not.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. Yep.
And right now it's a very like labor intensive process, but um, a number of like powerful players are working to automate decisions about trade finance, and then make those decisions kind of even automatically or centralize information about trade finance. And in order to be able to do that with like a good degree, to make good decisions about who to lend money to, you need a lot of data about how reliable companies are, like how reliable are shipments. And because trade finance is such a huge market, something like 5.7 trillion, there's a lot of pressure from players like banks to finally get this data aggregated so that these decisions can be made with real data rather than like hand-to-hand transactions.
We had at TPM Tech, we had one trade finance sort of technology provider who's trying to do exactly what you're talking about on a panel about automation, just sort of automation and logistics in general. But my big takeaway was the one area I really missed the boat on, bad pun, not intended, on the agenda this year was we didn't have enough about trade finance because it kept coming up and it kept coming up as this opportunity that seemed to be like people saying 2023 was the year where people stop talking about it and it starts being a thing that gathers actual momentum. So I'm sort of kicking myself that we didn't have more of an exploration about that because I've written about it and a
Yeah.
lot of people have sort of posited this idea that like this is the big thing. Like a lot of technology companies and investors over the last decade have told me every company, even software companies, essentially you're trying to either be a media company or a bank because a media company you can distribute or a bank you're sort of behind the money, um, that's underpinning a lot of the transaction. And so I'm it will definitely be a part next year without doubt. But it's super interesting that you pointed to that because that was definitely a takeaway this year that like we need to explore that part of the industry and find out if it's real yet, when it is likely to really get traction, and whether it's the data that's holding it up or some other issue. So
That's so interesting that you noticed that too. Yeah, I found that fascinating that like until just like a few years ago, trade finance was like something for specialists, like because other people didn't want to deal with it. It was like messy and who knows who
well,
these people are.
a logistics operations person is generally not set up to make finance decisions, right? So
Right.
that's how do you leverage what's going on in the logistics department in a way that helps the company from a financial and a cash flow perspective. I think that's been the tricky hurdle to sort of overcome. So sorry, didn't mean to
No,
talk
not
about
at all. Yeah. So, but just in the last few years, there have been a lot of new entrants to the market,
okay.
um, and a lot of interest from banks like HSBC and some other big ones.
Oh yeah. And there's been products out there, I mean, some
Yeah.
companies that are not startups that have been established in the logistics software space for 2 decades now. They've been trying to solve this since like '05. I can remember someone at GT Nexus trying to tell me about this opportunity in 2006, and
Wow.
um, I didn't know I didn't even know enough about the logistics industry, much less the finance industry at that point, to like understand what he was trying to tell me at that point, but
Mhm.
he saw the opportunity there. But here we are, like literally 17 years later, and it's still an opportunity. It's not like a tangible thing yet. So
Yeah, it really is kind of mind-boggling, when you think about both like the slowness of the progress on it, but also just like the size and scale of the problem. It's just super complicated. And one thing that interested me as well is, it's not that banks necessarily even want to hang on to these loans once they make them. They want to use them as financial vehicles
yeah,
as well, so trade them.
yeah,
And so, what's going to happen when that happens? When
yeah.
these loans are securitized, does it mean that like a shipment could like change hands as it crosses the ocean? And could someone decide to send it someplace other than its initial destination because it's worth more or less?
You addressed that a bit in your essay, didn't you? Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
That's super interesting part of the essay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are unfortunately kind of running out of time. I have two last questions.
Mm.
One is what sort of next for you? What area do you think you're going to focus on? Maybe it's part of the book. What do you kind of what are you going to build upon from what you've already done?
Well, I have to finish that stupid book. It's not stupid. It's wonderful, but
That's is
you know.
stupid. The book is going to be amazing. So yeah.
So I'm focusing on that. I just finished like a section on the history of like the industry of supply chain management, um, and now I am working on like transparency into like who's making stuff, and like why is it so hard to see down that
Yep.
particular road, which is, it's an interesting time for that because of the Forced Labor Protection Act and
Lots
potential
of
changes.
lots of companies,
So much.
including a part of S&P Global where I work, that is
Mhm.
looking at these sort of like hidden tiers of suppliers, third, fourth, fifth tier
Yes.
suppliers that you're,
Huge problem.
yeah, right. And then it's not just forced labor; it's like provenance of the goods, and
Hmm.
are they attached to states that we don't want to be doing business with? Super, super interesting. So,
Yeah. So I think we might see changes. I don't know. Yeah. So
yeah,
so I'm deep in the weeds of that. It's my favorite thing. It's so, boring to outsiders that like I can't resist it.
yeah. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this book when it comes out.
Thank
So I
you.
hope
Thank you.
hope you can get me an advanced
Thank you so much.
copy. So,
By the way, I'm always interested
okay,
in talking to people in the industry. So if anyone wants to get in touch, I'd love to hear your thoughts and,
definitely reach out. Yeah, and what
yeah.
after you answer the next question, I'll ask you to what's the best way to get in touch. But my final question for every guest: you have to tell me your favorite band or musician, and you have to tell me why. Most important.
Okay. Yeah, you warned me this was coming. I gotta say Pavement.
Perfect
I'm
answer.
a child. I came of age in the 90s and early 2000s, and I went to a liberal arts college. So you've gotta love the like indie rock of that particular moment. So yes, it's Pavement, and I went to see them this last summer, and it was like everyone was so old. I was like,
it's
oh, I'm old.
it's dangerous. It's like you see those things where you're like, the Beatles or the Led Zeppelin album that we
Mhm.
thought was old when we were kids is now that was a shorter period of time than the stuff that we love and we
I
listen to
know.
now.
I
So
know. I was like, my feet hurt,
time
and
marches on. Time marches on for all of us. So
it does.
Miriam, amazing discussion. How can
Thank you
people
so
get in touch
much.
with you?
You could just drop me a line at miriam.posner@gmail.com, or, whatever is comfortable for you. LinkedIn is good, or Twitter, whatever you like. I'd love to talk. And thank you so much, Eric. This was like a big honor for me, really.
Oh, I enjoyed it immensely. So I'm so glad you could make time and hope your office lets you in now. So
Fingers crossed.
thanks so much for joining me. Talk
Okay,
to you soon.
thanks again.
Bye. Okay, fantastic conversation. Please reach out to Miriam if you have any thoughts on helping her understand and write about this industry, untangle that Christmas set of Christmas lights. Um, Dad joke of the week time before we sign off. How long did it take the dog to eat the students' coding homework? I tried to do like a school-based one in honor of Miriam. So again, how long did it take the dog to eat students' coding homework? Also works since my dog barked during the episode. Just 2 bites. Get it? Bites, B-Y. Okay, whatever. You guys understand. Thank you to Miriam for a fantastic conversation. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. Always appreciate your support. Let me know. I appreciate any feedback you have for the show, about the guests, about anything. Just let me know. I want to make this valuable and enjoyable for all of you. Thanks as always to Nicole, the best producer in the world. Thanks to Sarah and the Let's Talk Supply Chain team. Someone support Blended Pledge. If you can't get your company to do it, flip them a few bucks so we can get diverse voices on stage. And I will see you all in 3 weeks, because this is one of those crazy weeks with 5 Fridays. So I will see you the first Friday of April. But so glad you could all join us today, and see you soon. Have a great weekend, everyone.